They raided at dawn. But he had disappeared the night before. A special forces team trained by some of West Africa's best men, with silencers, armored vehicles, top-secret codes and the name Omega, was given a single mission, to capture Ibrahim Traoré, the young leader of Burkina Faso. But when the door opened, they found no leader. All they found was an empty room, a portrait askew, and a radio playing a resistance song. No one understood. No one dared to speak up. And in that moment, the plot was exposed, history turned. If you believe that one man can challenge the map of power, leave a comment. This story is not just about politics. It is the cry of a continent. Operation Silence does not exist on paper. It was organized by Nigerians, but not on behalf of the Nigerian nation. The man behind it, Charles Bukari, the interior minister, a tough guy who once said, "Africa needs silence to develop." The goal, to neutralize Ibrahim Traoré before his vision spreads further. They called him a spark. A threat, a dangerous symbol. And then, under the guise of a trade and counterterrorism trip, the Omega task force arrived in Ouagadougou. But what they didn't expect, was that Traoré knew. And he wasn't just ready. He was set. They say wars begin with a gunshot. They are wrong. Africa's greatest wars begin with a handshake. On June 14, 2025, the Nigerian delegation landed in Ouagadougou. They wore dark blue suits, carrying diplomatic flags, and stepped down to a solemn welcome from the Burkina Faso Foreign Ministry reception. Under the flashbulbs, Nigeria's Interior Minister Charles Bukari smiled and shook hands with President Ibrahim Traoré. But there was no light in their eyes. Within arm's reach, there was a life-and-death confrontation between two visions of Africa's future. One believed in sovereignty, independence, and dignity that could not be bought. The other believed that peace could only exist when power was concentrated in those willing to compromise. Operation Silence began with a polite conversation about counterterrorism, about trade cooperation, about investment opportunities. But behind the words was a bloody plan, hatched over months, trained by elite units and coordinated by a network of officials who had sold their souls to a false sense of stability. In the satellite intercept, Colonel Sékou Zida, Traoré's head of intelligence, heard a clear order repeated over and over again. Leave no trace. No living witnesses. If the target resists, eliminate. The unit's call sign, Omega. A name that meant the end. They were not there to negotiate. They were there to end a man, and, if necessary, a movement. It was at this moment that history forked. Traoré knew what was happening. But he was not angry. He did not panic. He stepped quietly out onto the balcony, looking out at the city he loved. Ouagadougou was still dark. Only a few cafes were lit. And he said to the officer next to him, "Tonight I am not defending a title. I am defending a ray of hope. And if they want to extinguish it, I will let it burn." Traoré did not believe in coincidences. He had been preparing for this day since his first months in power, when he decided to expel French troops, cut off IMF aid and ban foreign advisors from the army. When others asked him, "Are you afraid of being assassinated?" he simply replied, "If I were afraid, I would not have stood up. They have money, planes, newspapers. But I have something they cannot buy, a country that is willing to die to be free." For months, he secretly assembled the Concentric Network, a coalition of Sahel veterans, young technologists, loyal officers and digital activists. They wore no military ranks. But they bore an oath, to protect the future. When the Nigerian delegation arrived, their every move was monitored. Facial recognition systems were installed in the hotel, satellite maps were cross-referenced with their movements. An IT student named Malik, just 19, was the first to detect strange signals from a Nigerian military satellite. Zita listened. Malik confirmed. Traoré nodded. And the plan to reverse history began. 3 a.m., the time when all the regular security units changed shifts. An underground corridor, built by the late President Thomas Sankara in the 1980s, leading from the presidential palace to an old church, was unlocked. It was not an escape route, but a strategic position created by a man who believed that independence lay not only in the constitution, but also in the terrain. Traoré disappeared. Without a sound. At 5:45, the Omega team approached the room where he was staying. At 6:03, they opened the door. Inside, just a tilted portrait of Sankara, a radio playing Afrique Devout, a revolutionary song banned from Nigerian airwaves. The Omega team leader shouted, "Target gone." And in that echo, the whole plot collapsed. Outside, 400 loyal soldiers had been moved silently through the night, surrounding each exit. The Nigerian delegation was unaware. They thought they had the upper hand. When the Omega commandos returned to the extraction point, they found dozens of camera lenses focused on them. The civilians, on the street, they turned out to be members of the network. The drivers, who turned out to be former special forces who had swapped their uniforms for civilian clothes to protect the government from within. No one fired. No one fired. But all the exits were blocked. Omega failed to capture their target. They were arrested. The Nigerian delegation failed to remove the symbol. They were unmasked. The news leaked quickly beyond Ouagadougou, beyond the border. Within 6 hours, African social media exploded. Ouaga does not kneel. Burkina Faso is not a satellite of Abuja. Traoré, the man no one dares to arrest. That night, Ouagadougou did not sleep. And the next day, the world changed. Every great revolution has a face. But the souls that keep it alive, often no one remembers their names. Ibrahim Traoré could not have defeated an international conspiracy alone. He could not have seen through walls, listened through satellites, set traps in the dark, without them, those whose names are not on the news. Who do not stand on the podium, but who always stand on the fragile line between independence and destruction. They call each other Dong Tam. Not because they are similar, but because they share the same heartbeat, defending sovereignty at all costs. Malik, 19, was a child who survived a mistaken airstrike in 2015. He does not know who his father is. But he has a gift, satellite decoding. When he heard an unusual signal from a series of encrypted Nigerian satellite communications, he did not call the police. He called Siku Zita directly. Zita, a retired colonel who fought under Sankara and was the sole survivor of a 1991 ambush by French mercenaries, doesn't believe in coincidences. He listens to Malik, pauses for a few seconds, then says only one sentence. "They're coming. Call everyone to their positions." In an abandoned church on the east side of town. Isata, a Swedish-educated systems engineer who turned down a job offer from Google, is resetting the city's navigation system. In a former military barracks near the Ghanaian border, Captain Doumbia, who was demoted for refusing to pass on military information to foreign advisors, is training a militia group to become a silent response. In the basement of a coffee shop, 3 philosophy students are setting up a reflection room, a group that writes articles exposing disguised diplomatic language and analyzing suspicious visits. They carry no modern weapons. But they had something more terrifying than guns, the knowledge that if they did not do it, no one else would. As one soldier once said, "I will not die for this country. I live so that it does not die." And that was the guiding principle for the Dong Tom network, not to mythologize sacrifice, but to consider the survival of ideas as the #1 priority. The counterattack began with silence. There was no alarm. No emergency cabinet meeting. Not a single leak. It was as if Burkina Faso had gone numb. But that was the strategy. Traoré ordered the entire soft power infrastructure system, disconnecting foreign communication systems. stopping responses to international diplomatic channels, paralyzing the movement data of convoys with diplomatic insignia. To the outside world, Burkina Faso suddenly became unpredictable. And in that darkness, the Dong Tam network began to reflect the plot, turning Nigeria's own plan into a weakness. The Omega team was in a stealth in the spotlight situation, movements were controlled. Communications were exposed, the location was surrounded on all sides by civilians. At the airport, a helicopter waiting to withdraw the target suddenly had a navigation problem. Because a technician, a member of Dong Tam, accidentally changed the route. No one was hurt. But the entire helicopter had to change course, landing at a military base controlled by Burkina Faso forces. No guns needed. They won with data. When Kari discovered that the plan was being exposed, he ordered Plan B to be activated, the commandos retreating to the embassy. But the only route was stuck in traffic for no apparent reason. In fact, 27 taxis had been deliberately stuck at strategic intersections. The drivers? All were veterans of Gao, Mopti, Timbuktu. They drove as if nothing was happening, but each turn of the wheel was an invisible blow to the heart of a nation's plans. One of them, a driver named Issouf, retired at the age of 62, once said a quote that was later emblazoned on the wall of the University of Ouaga. "I may have been just a passenger. But that day, I drove history off course." When Traoré appeared on national television, not from the presidential palace, but from an old room inside an abandoned library, he said what no one expected him to say. "I do not call my Nigerian brothers enemies. I call them people who have forgotten that they were once in chains. But if anyone thinks that Burkina Faso will bow down to the vestments or surrender to aid, they have misread the map of the African soul." He did not insult. He did not threaten. He did not retaliate. He called for an awakening, not with anger, but with pride. That night, across Accra, Bamako, Niamey, Dakar, and even Abuja, the hashtags appeared. Africa Unchained, Ouaga rises, we are the firewall. The story of the Dong Tam network spread. No one knew exactly who they were. But every young person looking at the screen thinks to themselves, I could be a link in that chain. The night of June 14th was moonless. But in Ouagadougou, light could still be seen, from sleepless eyes. As the Omega task force retreated to a makeshift shelter inside a building labeled the Burkina, Nigeria Bilateral Trade Center. They had no idea that the entire neighborhood had been cordoned off. Not by the police. Not by the military. But by civilians, who had ceased to be victims. On the rooftops, teenagers who looked like TikTok live streamers were actually digital warriors, monitoring heat, tracking movement, and reporting back to the underground command center. Underground. The city's old underground pipes, used for telephone cables, were repurposed as high-speed internal fiber optic lines. From tea shops to gas stations, all eyes were on the same direction, the building Nigeria thought it controlled. We're surrounding an elite army. No. We are besieging the fear they bring. It was a conversation between two street guards, a veteran and a senior. Inside, Omega began to panic. Not because of the gunfire. But because, nothing. No sirens. No footsteps. No GPS signals. Everything was dead. No one could hear them anymore. At 2 a.m., the Omega team leader asked to call for backup from Abuja. The signal was sent. No response. 3 minutes later, a video began playing on their phones, no one knew where it had come from. In the video, a Nigerian soldier collapsed on the banks of the Niger River. Eyes wide open, muttering. I was just following orders. But orders cannot kill other people's dreams. It wasn't a text message. It was a moral judgment, sent from the Dong Tam network. As a reminder, we don't kill. We reflect. At 3:15 a.m., Traoré appeared at the gate of the building. No uniform. No guards. Carrying only an old loudspeaker, standing in the darkness. Speaking not with commands, but with a silence that had long needed to be broken. You came as partners, but you act like colonists. I don't hate you. But I will not let my country become the final stop for secret orders from Abuja. Paris or Washington. No one answered. A few minutes later, a door opened. The head of the Nigerian delegation, Interior Minister Charles Bukari himself, emerged. No soldiers. No body armor. He looked at Traoré and said, "We misjudged you. We thought we could stifle an individual. We didn't expect to hit a generation." That same morning, Nigeria issued a diplomatic apology. 2 senior officials resigned. The ambassador bowed publicly on television, a bow not just to Burkina Faso, but to a new era that was emerging. Traoré did not declare victory. He simply went on national television and said, "No one was executed. No one was imprisoned. Because we don't need revenge. We need awakening. If they are afraid of one man, let them know, he is not alone. He stands on the shoulders of millions." At that moment, thousands of comments flooded digital platforms. "I am the one behind you. Africa no longer asks for permission. Ouagadougou is the starting point of a new continent. If you believe Traoré's courage is not an event, but the call of an awakening Africa, leave your thoughts below. Comment. Share, and spread the word. Because we may be the next to rise up. Not all those in the shadows are enemies." 3 weeks before Operation Silence, a strange message arrived at the Level 1 encrypted receiving station in Ouagadougou. No satellite. No IP routing. Just a few lines, in ancient Hausa. The one called Omega is actually Alpha. 45° 5 foot 19 N, find him there. Do not confront. Do not hide. Display the flag. Zeta, Traoré's intelligence chief, initially thought it was a hoax. But when he checked the correct coordinates, he found a secret satellite relay station used by the Nigerian Special Forces for communications. That was the first moment he knew, someone from the inside was helping them. That person's code name, Kamal. According to secret post-war documents, Kamal was a strategic officer in the Nigerian General Staff. He graduated with honors from the U.S. Military Academy and was recruited directly into the West African Geopolitical Analysis Team. But what no one knew. Kamal was the son of a Tuareg warrior who was murdered by French mercenaries. Since childhood, he had heard about Sankara, about Lumumba, about the never-completed ideal of independence of this continent. He did not join the army to serve power. He joined to destroy the power structure from within. In the 3 months before Operation Silence, it was Kamal who sent satellite coordination parameters to Malik. Sent the code list of Omega officers to the ISATA engineering network. It was even he who caused the technical malfunction that caused the helicopters to reroute. After the operation failed, Kamal was nowhere to be found in any records. He disappeared from Abuja as if he had never existed. It is said that he retreated to Niger, lived in hiding with the Fulani tribe, and continued to train young leaders. There is a hypothesis that he was purged. But a grainy video, which emerged 4 days after Nigeria's public apology, went viral. A man, his face covered and dressed in desert-colored clothing, looked into the camera and said, "I am Nigerian. But my blood is the blood of the Sahel. I did not betray my country. I refuse to be enslaved." The twist changed everything. Suddenly, the story was no longer a Nigerian plot to attack Burkina Faso. It was a Nigerian who saved a Burkina Faso president. To defend an African future without foreign borders. A man in the enemy's heart. But his heart was with the people. When the storm passed, people counted the wounds. But in Ouagadougou, there was no crying. No collapsed houses. No bloodshed. Only one thing remained, the faith that had never been killed. Ibrahim Traoré did not turn his country into a battlefield. He turned the plot to overthrow him into a living manifesto for a new Africa, where no one has to bow down because they were born on a continent torn apart by colonial maps. He is not a Superman. But he dares not to be afraid. He does not have a stick of power, but he has millions of young people who are awakening. And now, the question is no longer, who wants to kill Traoré? But who among us is willing to live like him, without asking permission to be free? Fire if you believe that the story of Ibrahim Traoré is not just political, but a wake-up call for a generation. Comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Let's tell this story again. Because history needs more than readers, it needs people to fuel the fire. Now it's our turn. Together. Let's keep the fire burning.